Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Today's show is a bit different. It's more on the broadcasting side. Today, I'll be giving you a little bit about the Reparations Report, which you will learn more about in just a few seconds. We have some more information about some upcoming dates for this reparation movement. Just a heads up. Some of the footage, it's all right. It's not the best footage, but the main thing is just to hear the message about what's going on and what's being said. Some of the footage I had to edit out because it just really wasn't great. I didn't have enough time to really set my camera up the way that I need to. But uh, tune in and enjoy. Thank you.
Justice efforts. For health and wellness, we recommend the following. The city should consider calculating and developing compensatory measures for the health harms experienced by Black Angelenos as a result of racial discrimination. We also recommend that the city proactively address systemic inequities in healthcare and disparities in health outcomes. And finally, the city should champion cultural competency in healthcare and support the development of culturally compatible healthcare professionals. We know the research shows us that when culturally compatible healthcare professionals, folks who look like us and understand our realities, we have greater health outcomes. So this is an important recommendation we hope the city can consider. The next area of harm to discuss is racism in the environment and infrastructure. After being denied residency in many parts of Los Angeles during the 1950s and 1960s, Black families found themselves generally confined to neighborhoods in southern Los Angeles and the northeastern corner of the San Fernando Valley. Many of these neighborhoods were set aside for Black residents. They were considered undesirable because of the numerous industrial hazards found in these areas. In fact, the widespread enforcement of restrictive covenants, which we'll talk about momentarily, prevented Black families from moving to those safe and more prosperous neighborhoods, and instead largely confined them to industrial locations in South Los Angeles and the Northeastern Valley, where industrial pollutants presented multiple threats to their health and well-being of those people who resided and worked there. We found Black Angelenos were more likely to live near brownfields, the map, to your right or your left, were more likely to live near brownfields, which were lands with potentially hazardous substances and contaminants compared to white residents, averaging higher in exposure to particle matter 2.5, toxic releases, and lead exposure. We also found that historical and systemic racism in urban planning has led to significant environmental health disparities in Black communities, and they carry a higher pollution burden compared to white families. 25 census tracts with over 50% Black residents have a higher pollution burden score of 64.3 compared to tracts with 75% white families at 55.64. As a result of these environments, we found that asthma, cardiovascular disease, and infant health all are disturbingly high in Los Angeles Black communities, including low birth rates at the 94th percentile, and have higher exposure to contaminants in drinking water, lead exposure, and higher projected heat wave mortality rates. To begin to address these injustices, we recommend the following. Develop legislation and policies that advance environmental protections for harmed communities. Support community-based programs that advance environmental justice. And develop measures to determine the cost of environmental justice and begin to compensate Black Angelenos. The next area in which we want to discuss, I know is an area of great harm for many, is the unjust legal system. For Black Angelenos, the lived experiences of interacting with various facets of legal system continues to be unjust and in many cases deadly. Cases like Rodney King in 1991 and recent cases such as Takar Smith in 2023 highlight ongoing police violence against Black residents. We found that Black residents make up a disproportionate number of those involved in LAPD shooting incidents at 28%, arrest rates at 27%, and stops at 26%, despite their lower population percentage at only 8%. We also found, which the chart here also demonstrates that, we also found that aggressive policing, including unnecessary raids by the Special Weapons and Tactics, or SWAT units, target Black communities, fostering distrust and fear. Black Angelenos have been charged at 17 times the rate of white people under the 3 strikes and you're out, AB 971 sentencing measure. And Black residents have been historically excluded from juries and continue to experience exclusions as a result of felonies and preemptory challenges. We think that this area, which you'll see in the report, requires a lot of attention on the part of the city. But to begin, the city should consider calculating and compensating for the cost of over-policing, police harassment, unjust convictions, inequitable sentencing practices, and the loss of freedom. The city should also mandate and increase anti-racism and justice-centered, racial justice-centered training and education programs for city officials, including the LAPD, city council members, district attorneys, and prosecutors, and judges. Finally, the city should champion a justice-centered policies and practices surrounding policing and prosecution practices. Once again, the city should consider supporting and funding community-based healing and safety initiatives and actively strike down existing legislation that disproportionately target and impact Black residents. The next category is housing segregation. The current state of Black home ownership is directly correlated to the history of housing segregation in Los Angeles. Zoning ordinance of 1908 led to restrictive zoning laws and restrictive covenants, along with redlining, ultimately limited Black home ownership. At the start of the 20th century, legal segregation kept residents from pursuing better housing in other parts of the city, along with de facto cultural practices in segregation and violent enforcement, oftentimes prohibited Black residents from residing across the city. While measures such as the Wrongful Fair Housing Act of 1963 attempted to ensure that citizens had equal access to housing, local citizens in Los Angeles actively worked to undermine and end housing policies, fair housing policies. We found that 1, Proposition 14 of 1964 repealed the Wrongful Fair Housing Act of 1963, reinstating discriminatory practices. In neighborhoods in Los Angeles that restricted Black people from living there saw greater equity growth, as you can see in the chart here. In blue is areas with 0 to 5% Black, and orange is area with, and purple is areas with 50 to 99% Black. Orange represents all of the city of Los Angeles. You can see in areas with higher levels of Black populations, there's a decreased value and equity growth there. Local real estate and realty boards, ethics codes of the early 20th century promoted racial segregation. And as a result of housing segregation, 70% of the Black population were forced to reside in the Central Alameda, South Park, South Central LA, and Watts by 1930. We found that segregation in housing policies historically limited Black wealth accumulation through home ownership, such that 68.3% of white households own homes versus only 41.5% of Black households that own homes in the city of Los Angeles. To begin to address these inequities, we recommend that the city calculate the cost of housing inequity and launch compensatory efforts, fund and support programs that advance equity in home ownership opportunities, and you heard it earlier, proactively address homelessness and housing insecurity among among Black residents. Home buyer assistance, down payment assistance, appraisal protections, and programs to address housing insecurity were all highly endorsed as a legitimate form of housing reparation among over 80% of surveyed respondents. The next category is stolen labor and hindered opportunity. Historical discrimination has resulted in a significant loss of wage opportunity for Black residents. So not only were they prohibited from buying in certain neighborhoods, their income and wage opportunities were also hindered, also limiting their ability to buy in more affluent neighborhoods. Yet, despite legal protections such as Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Equal Employment Opportunity Act of 1972, and the California Fair Employment and Housing Act of 1959, significant hiring and pay disparities remain in Los Angeles. We found that historically public sector employment was crucial for Black Americans, especially in the United States Postal Service and the Los Angeles Police Department. Early hires, for example. However, post-World War II, the public sector provided stable jobs, but the best positions were often reserved for whites. Throughout the 20th century, the LAPD and the LAFD were strongholds for anti-Black sentiments. They resisted integration despite external pressures. And in 1950s, to focus on LAFD, Black firefighters were confined to 2 stations with no promotion opportunities. Yet, however, with the involvement of the NAACP, this led to many legal battles highlighting the LAFD's discriminatory practices. Yet, by the 1980s, only 7% of firefighters were Black. You can begin to see the officials and administrators, which you'll see in the report as well. I realize it's quite small here. But you'll see, based on the different areas, the disparities in representation. Black is the second column. Finding number 3, today, wage parity remains an issue, especially for Black employees. White employees, especially white men, still earn more on average. We recommend the following considerations for reparations. Rectify pay and employment inequities and wage loss, advance equal and equitable employment opportunities, and increase measures to employ Black Angelenos in city and union jobs, all which were highly endorsed by survey participants. The next category to evaluate is separate and unequal education. Though the Brown versus Board of Education court decision in 1954 ended legal segregation, community practices of segregation persisted due to housing policies. In Los Angeles, the use of community schools were used to maintain segregation, and biased housing policies prevented Black children from accessing certain schools. And while we recognize that some of the findings in this section fall outside of the jurisdiction of the City of Los Angeles, the findings and recommendations do point to important measures the city should consider in order to ensure that every child in the City of Los Angeles has equitable access to quality education. Our findings include, number 1, school segregation has led to disparities in academic outcomes compared to white students, and inequities persist for Black students as they have limited access to high-performing schools, AP courses, and diverse curriculum. We also found that racist perceptions of Black students, along with the lack of cultural understanding, has led to unsupportive classroom environments and teachers. And number 3, the disproportionate disciplinary actions against Black students have adversely affected students' performance, students' self-identity and belonging, and are linked to unjust criminalization and criminalization and policing of Black students, as demonstrated in the student suspension rate from 22 to 23, with Blacks making up the largest proportion. We recommend the following. Once again, we recognize that LAUSD is outside of the jurisdiction. However, these are important recommendations to increase equitable education. Increase access to culturally competent educators and support programs that build a pipeline for Black educators. Fund programs that increase access to college preparation and AP courses for Black students, and adopt policies that eliminate the school to prison pipeline very crucial among 77.6% of respondents. The city should also consider funding community-driven programs that enrich the educational experiences of Black children, as many studies document the utility and the effectiveness of these types of programs. And bear with me, I know we have been here, you all had a long day, we have a few more areas to present, but I thank you all for your attention to this important matter. The next area we'll discuss is political disenfranchisement. Voting rights initially were restricted to white male citizens in the 1849 California Constitution. Discriminatory practices persisted despite the 15th Amendment's ratification in 1870, where we saw literacy tests and poll taxes being implemented. These discriminatory practices, both official and unofficial, were in effect when the city of Los Angeles was founded on September 4th of 1781, and later incorporated on April 4th of 1850. Discriminatory voting laws and challenges to Black civic participation have left a legacy of apprehension and a history of discrimination and disenfranchisement among Black residents. We find that these barriers to civic participation were a result of two primary factors: housing restrictions and economic discrimination, including employment discrimination. These led to concentrations of Black people in the Central Avenue district, limiting their political power and influence. We also found that Black leadership in Los Angeles was limited, and such that not a single African American held public office of any kind in the city of Los Angeles until 1963. We also found that in Los Angeles, previous city officials, mayors, council members, for example, have perpetuated segregation in housing, education, and employment, and African American communities face persistent discrimination. You see the council district representation here. To begin to atone for these injustices, we recommend that the city proactively protect civil and voting rights of disenfranchised communities, implement justice-centered and anti-racist districting policies and practices, and advance anti-racist governance of the entire city of Los Angeles. All of these things have pointed to what have been termed the pathology of the Black family. We saw that whether it was enslavement, Reconstruction, of Jim Crow, they all have negatively impacted the African American family and the family stability. And while government policies and programs were implemented, these policies oftentimes help white families but negatively impacted or in fact harmed Black families. In 1965, the Daniel P. Moynihan report produced for the U.S. Department of Labor incorrectly blamed the Black family structure for economic struggles, influencing harmful policies to this day. We find that homelessness in Los Angeles continues to burden Black families. Black people are disproportionately affected by homelessness in the city of Los Angeles, representing 33% of the homeless population in 2023. And institutional racism and housing policies, including redlining and segregation, contributes to high Black homelessness rates. Also, Black children are overrepresented in the foster care system, making up 24% of those in foster care, despite being only 7% of the child population in Los Angeles County. Black youth are disproportionately detained by the juvenile justice system due to policies linked to the school-to-prison pipeline, such as the city's municipal code 45.04, also known as the daytime curfew law. Black women in Los Angeles face higher rates of violence, particularly domestic violence. Despite making up 4% of the population, Black women accounted for 23% of domestic violence victims and nearly a third of female murder victims. Here you see the youth arrest rate by Los Angeles County from 2019, Black representing the purple, and blue is represented by white and green Hispanic. You clearly see the disparity here. We recommend the following: provide culturally competent housing support and family-centered family support services. Address the disproportionate arrest and detainment of Black youth and address the underprotection of Black women and girls. The next area is control over creative and cultural and intellectual life. We see historically, as African Americans have migrated to California, they brought with them musical traditions, cultural practices that still influence the cultural landscape of Los Angeles to this day. However, they face many challenges, including limited access as a result of segregation laws and policing and harassment that restricted Black performers historically and patrons in their businesses, such as the case of Lucy's Beach. We find that historically Black cultural activities were segregated with support by laws and policies and police harassment, and which resulted in what are known as sundown towns, which are mapped here. Sundown towns essentially were towns that were not safe for African Americans to be out in or about when the sun was going down, and certainly when the sun was down. We found that segregation in sports disallowed talented African Americans from having equal involvement in local sports, including basketball, baseball, as another illustration. And Black coaches are rare in both professional and collegiate teams, despite their representation as athletes. We also found that Hollywood continues to struggle with racial diversity despite incentives, especially in the areas of directors and writers. We recognize that a lot of the cultural space is outside of the scope of the city. However, there are some important opportunities for the city to address. The city could mandate equitable employment, pay, and promotion in entertainment industries. The city could issue historic preservation seals and landmarks for Black cultural and historic sites, as they are constantly undergoing revision, removal, and erasure. We also recommend that the city increase Black representation on their museum boards and other creative and performing arts boards, as they are significantly underrepresented. The totality of all these harms have resulted in what we term, and which is commonly termed, the wealth gap. Discriminatory housing practices, including unfair mortgage lending practices, deny African Americans access to certain areas of the city, and discriminatory banking policies led to mistrust of banks and avoidance of their services. As a result, you find that while home ownership is a significant mode in which individuals accumulate wealth, for Black Angelenos, they have been significantly hindered in this area. We find that disparities continued in terms of median family income, such that Black residents' median family income represents only 55.8% of white family median income. Black Angelenos reported a median net worth of only $4,000, which was just over 1%, only 1% of the wealth held by white households. Also, home ownership rates and liquid assets are lower in the areas of savings and checking accounts among Black Angelenos compared to white residents. And Black households are less likely to own vehicles, more likely to hold vehicle and credit card debt. And there are higher rates of credit card and student loan debt among Black residents. To begin to address these, along with the previous recommendations, we recommend the final three. Endorse state and federal reparation efforts to eliminate the racial wealth gap. Evaluate debt forgiveness programs that eliminate wealth disparities, and support investment in retirement educational programs. This was also highly supported, especially debt forgiveness and educational programs, by survey respondents. We want to highlight just a few of the limitations from the study in general and from the ethnographic study. The study was limited to 1 year of research, so the study time frame was a barrier, but we know how important this moment is and this time to be able to dive into the research. As a result of that, community voices, we got to engage them in a multitude of ways, and we hope to continue to do that, but that was also limited. And also our access to city data was a challenge as well, as there are many barriers to accessing transparent data in many state systems. So we want to continue to be able to advance the recommendations that we put forward. In fact, we have upcoming 3 sessions that we're inviting the public. Please consider joining. I hope you got the flyers out front, and where you can begin to give us feedback on the recommendations you heard today. And if there's something that's missing, as you will see in the executive summary, we're welcome and open to the opportunity to begin to evaluate additional opportunities about the opportunity to compensate. You heard me say over and over, compensate, compensate, and compensate. Well, there has to be a model in place, and so I want to invite up the next person who will transition to is an opportunity to begin to talk about the funding models and different reparation models that have accepted.
Thank you so much, Dr. Brown. Before we talk about the funding models, I think it's important for us to have a moment to hear from a council member from the 9th District who supports us in this significant way. And before he comes, I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge Commissioner Lucine from the Commission on the Status of Women, who is fighting for justice and equity for women. And when you think about, you can clap her up, when you think about domestic violence levels for African American women still being higher till this day because of some of the harms from the past, we appreciate your fight. I also want to say, we talked a lot about what went wrong. We have our very own Ronell Hampton, who is working on Black people experiencing homelessness, doing this work with Dr. Octavian Swartz and others at the county. So appreciate this work moving forward. But I will tell you, when you think about some of the harms as it relates to where people live and where people have to live, you can look at the maps. I see urban leagues in the house here and there. Thank you so much, Anderson, for being here. We want to tell you, we know those harms are still hurting our community. When you think about the environmental hazards, when you think about the food deserts or food swamps, as Dr. Gamage said, we want to, and even overcrowding, those were the factors that caused our community to have higher mortality rates during the COVID crisis. And although this commission was led and put together by a few council members, considering the work of council member, soon to be council president Marquise Harris Dawson, our very own former council member Mark Ridley Thomas, and our beloved council member Kern Price, who actually made sure for those communities hardest hit by COVID, we had $10 million through the Civil Rights Department to give to those communities in need. He is always a champion for us and a force multiplier and a great partner with Councilmember Heather Hutt and other members of our city council. With that, I want to bring you someone from the Great Ninth. It's not an easy drive from the Great Ninth. He had a big party for city employees just yesterday, which is why we would do anything and walk through fire for this councilman who stands up for a better Los Angeles and our community. Councilmember Price, the floor is yours for a moment.
Thank you, Bruce. It's really an angel in our community. And I just want to thank everyone for being here. This is a story. This is a story. We are all part of it. And just so I'm honored to join you. Special shout out to our CSUN family, the dean, provost. Appreciate your presence. And of course, for Prematics and the pioneering civil rights department. Coordinate this and a variety of other very important discussions that we have. But today we're focusing on reparations. So let's give another shout out to our commissioners who've given us the time, the effort, and this extraordinary, groundbreaking event that we are a part of. The Advisory Commission, of course, is doing some groundbreaking work. And it's going to, I think, have a ripple effect really going across this country. Because nobody's doing it like here in LA. And, I was in Chicago, witnessing history, first African American woman. But I got to tell you, gang, we're making changes here too. This is also a significant place to be. I've witnessed the tides of change in our country. shared moment. This is a shared moment where we are actually talking about some concrete proposals, ideas, suggestions, recommendations of how we move this forward. For decades, as elected official both at the state level and at the city level, I've taken great pride in advocating for policies that close the gaps in equity. You are aware, providing our most vulnerable citizens with resources, information, make a difference. It's been an uphill battle. Obviously, it requires patience, hard work, and determination, and an unshakable commitment to do what's right. And I know all of you share that commitment, otherwise you wouldn't be here today. But this discussion around reparations here in the city, led by our commission, has evolved, I think, into some real public-oriented discussions. And it's centered around the release of this report. So we have a roadmap. This is a pivotal juncture that we stand at. I think it's pretty obvious. Reparations are more than just a promise. They are a commitment to confront the legacy of racism with sincerity, integrity, and transparency. Right? It's a process. And I think that's one of the things that this commission has been articulating very clearly. This is not a one-stop, one-done deal. It's a process that involves a variety of issues and concerns. LA is leading the charge for these long overdue efforts, and I think we're going to be setting an example for communities all around this country. This is a conversation that continues to gain momentum, and it grows louder every day. Louder every day. As one of the 50 members on the council, my staff and I are laser focused on ensuring that our policies reflect the equity, justice, and dignity and respect that has been called out in many of these recommendations. We also want to recognize that historical justice is crucial. It's crucial as we aspire to build a future where everybody can reach their full potential. So again, we are together kind of laying the groundwork, creating a framework, not just for now, but for what happens after that. You know, we talked about health, housing, employment, green space, education, just a variety of areas that we have an opportunity to really make a difference here. The future of Black Angelenos hinges on our ability to level the playing field. Level the playing field, man. These recommendations offer some specific outcomes, actions that we can take now and in the future. Reparations are a critical step, but they're not the only step toward restoring rights and benefits that have been denied for far too long. And so again, your thoughtful participation and involvement helps to fuel that. It's not just about reparative justice, it's about building a fair and inclusive future for everybody. And so while we break away from the change of social, economic, political, education, and health disparities, we know that we have to start a meaningful dialogue about actions that we can take, specific actions we can take. Again, we have the benefit of not just generalities, but some actual specifics that we can focus in on. With the data that we are closer than ever to addressing some of the wrongs that Black and brown communities face on a daily basis. You know, these are systemic changes that have impacted us all. It's important that we step forward developing reparations programs with viable funding solutions. I think we're going to be hearing about some funding solutions. And I'm thrilled that LA, again, is leading by example on that. So we're eager to see how such programs are going to benefit us, how we're going to benefit Black Angelina, not in the future, but also now, right? Now we're getting groundwork for the future. Because, ladies and gentlemen, the future is now. We have an outstanding opportunity to really change and focus and shift looks like in Los Angeles. I'm proud to be part of this session. I'm proud that you are a part of this session. And I'm proud to be here tonight. Thank you.
Councilmember Curry Price for your new night. Thank you. And speaking of legislative action, just FYI, those interested in reparations, the California State Assembly is taking up 3 important bills on reparations tomorrow that will be voted on the floor. It'd be a great time to call or write to your assembly person
or a friendly Republican Assembly person, or in someone in the adjacent district, it's important that they hear from us right now. If California and LA don't succeed, it's going to be problematic for the rest of the nation. Okay, we promised you a little bit about funding solutions, and let's welcome Dr. Marissa Tereski, PhD.
Good evening, everyone. As Dominique said, I am Dr. Marissa Tereski. I'm the Director of Research for Mockingbird Analytics. We're an equity-based consulting firm here in Los Angeles. I'm thrilled to be sharing some of our findings from our research with you tonight. So our role is really as the fund development partner, and we're tasked with identifying feasible fiscal models that the city can then adapt for a uniquely Los Angeles reparations program, one that's really specific to the city's context, that fits with the unique racialized history of the city itself. And this means really being strategic around funding for reparations programs, with how they're framed, and also how they're introduced in other places and across different time spans. So this also meant ensuring the focus remained on issues of stolen wealth and really prioritizing both the process just as much as the outcomes themselves. So with that, okay. So I'm going to be presenting a bit of a snapshot of our broader research today. So I do want to mention that you can access a more full interim report on the LA Civil Rights website. So we'll start with just an overview of the research questions that we asked. Then we'll go into some case studies that we examined, and then we'll move into some main evidence-based funding models, and then we'll transition into major forms of disbursement that we found, and then I'll leave you with some key takeaways for next steps. All right, so the research questions that we asked, we identified three main research questions that we co-created with the city as well. And through these, we really ensure that all international pillars of restitution remain central to the work based on that United Nations model. This required policy initiatives for municipalities, funding opportunities that were connected to legislation in many, many ways. So we found it important to have that logic around both the opportunities and the limitations, and use that kind of framing throughout the entire process. So today, I'll cover some key themes around both the challenges as well as the benefits, how these programs in particular have been codified in other cases. So let's go into the cases. All right, so we conducted 5 main cases, as Dr. Gamage mentioned, 2 of which are historical case studies. Tonight, I'll focus on Japanese internment. That case seems most relevant here because the reparations were all United States-based, federally funded. So for those who aren't familiar with the case, in 1942, 120,000 Japanese Americans were forcibly removed and incarcerated. After 40 years of tremendous advocacy, reparations were finally obtained, and that was codified as the Civil Liberties Act of 1988. It entailed a formal apology, as well as a small fund that was created for both education, as well as $20,000 redress payments to living survivors. When you start to break this restitution payment down per year, it comes to a little over $6,600 per year of internment. The federal government created an entire entity called the Office of Redress Administration, and they were really tasked with the nuts and bolts of this project. They identified, located, and authorized tax-free payments, and that was received by over 82,000 living Japanese American survivors. It totaled about $1.6 billion. So then we move into contemporary case studies. So from the left, we have the cases that were mostly publicly funded. So here, Evanston, Illinois is a great example. They use mostly cannabis sales tax, and they actually codified their program as a restorative housing. Oh, we're not going to cover the Holocaust Survivor Program. I'm a little tight on time, but that is in our report. So please do check that out. So then in Evanston, they codified the program as the restorative housing program, which entailed $25,000 payments to redress payments to residents who experienced housing discrimination between the timeline of 1919 to 1969. And then we've got on the far right, my left, I guess. You're right. We've got $50 million that the Bush Foundation allocated to go directly to Black residents in the Twin Cities, and that was in the form of $25,000 payments and unrestricted funds, no receipt necessary or reporting. So with some of these cases, we can start to get a sense of the funding models and these different funding streams that are possible. So the main funding streams that we identified can really be broken down into 4 main models. So we've got the public funding, which is more federal and municipally funded. So we've got cases like Evanston and Japanese internment, to something more philanthropically funded, like the case of the Twin Cities and the Bush Foundation. Then we've got the case of grassroots organizing funding models, and that's more reflective of the work done in Denver, Colorado. They have reparations circles going where residents mobilize funds of private residents. There is a small philanthropic element there as well, but then we've got another case where it's more discreetly public and private partnership that is funding a reparations program, which is the case more or less with what's happening right now in Asheville and Whitcomb County, North Carolina. So I want to zoom in briefly on Asheville and Whitcomb County's reparations program that seems most relevant to Los Angeles, given they're in a timeline comes through. They're in a similar place in their process to Los Angeles. They had just conducted a citywide audit, and they have a similarly heterogeneous Black population as well. They're using mostly public funds, about $5 million right now from both the city and the county. And then they do have a separate pool of private funding that they've been raising separately through an organization that they established called the Reparations Stakeholder Authority of Asheville, that's currently fiscally sponsored by the Zedek Social Justice Fund, which allocated additional funding there. And what's really interesting about that program in particular is that they're actually proposing community benefits. A community benefits plan over individual payments in the form of community health workers. So this brings up this question of what are some options for disbursement models beyond individual payments? So we've found 3 kind of main models based on our research. So we've got the individual payments, as is the case of Evanston, but then we've also got this case of community health workers, of more of that community benefits piece, and then you've got the case of Denver that's dispersing more grants to organizations and not directly to residents themselves. They're doing a lot of work with food justice organizations throughout the municipality. So that leads us to some key takeaways that we determined based on our findings. Due to the tremendous complexity of the process, there's no real consensus on how to fund a specifically Los Angeles reparations program. As the former chair of the Asheville reparations program said, we're developing the language as we go, whether it makes sense elsewhere, it makes sense here in Asheville. So in that sense, these programs are often uniquely place-based. And we know that LA is unlike anywhere else in the world, and there's only so much we can apply to a reparations program here. That being said, there are some really big takeaways in the program needing to be community-led, and without that we risk further harm instead of the transformative repair that this process seeks. So much like abolition, the process really needs to be rooted in Black Angelenos' needs and visions to chart a uniquely Angeleno course because of the distinct industries as well, and histories in the city. There's certainly some really important parts of these models that do have scalable components that we can apply to a place like Los Angeles, one of them being the importance of Black governance. That was central to all the contemporary cases of reparations funding. Any reparations program really must prioritize Black people governing the money and deciding the policies surrounding its use. So often this meant each resident has agency and self-determination in how those funds are then used through, for instance, a lack of restrictions and no reporting requirements, as was the case in the Twin Cities. And then a reparations leader actually in Denver discussed control as a form of colonization, demonstrating the real healing possibilities that can come from this flexibility in how the funding is used. The other takeaway we found was the importance of finding or creating an intermediary. In all the cases, the leaders have aligned with or created themselves an intermediary organization to store and disperse these funds. This is also more than just a technical piece. This is also about building vibrant Black-led coalitions and allies in the reparations movement. So any funding decisions should be Black-led, and when finding or creating an intermediary organization to disperse that funding, that also needs to be Black-led or at least values aligned with the ethos of reparations, meaning having roots and visions for Black power, Black agency, and Black self-determination. So this means Black-led nonprofits, nonprofit leadership, and advisory boards throughout the entire process. So you can see that being reflected in the case of Evanston. They have a reparations stakeholder authority of Evanston, as well as Evanston Community Foundation as kind of key players in their reparations program for holding and managing the funds that come through, developing all of the processes, and distributing the funds as directed by the stakeholder authority. So that's really, again, really important part of the coalition building process as well. And then finally, I've said it a few times already, and I'll say it again, the importance of Black leadership here is critical to shaping the funding process without recreating harm. And one major way that we found in the results of this Black leadership is manifesting in a streamlined application process. So one suggestion from reparations leaders, both in the Twin Cities and in Denver, was to only require residents to sign up. In fact, and not even to submit an application, as some residents were actually triggered by lineage questions and other questions, not knowing where they came from and the harm that that can ultimately create. Others assumed their eligibility, and only after submission did they find out they didn't actually qualify, and that was, again, shattering for people. So transparency in this whole process is really one of kindness and critical that the leadership be transparent throughout the entire process to allow for really this healing potential of this program to flourish. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Okay, we do have a panel discussion. We're going to do the short version of the panel discussion. And we will still be taking public comment at 7:35. If you're planning to make a comment, gather yourself now. Because we're going to do short, brief comments at 60 seconds per participant. So we'll get to that. Right now we're going to do a panel. And we have on the stage our panel. You heard from Attorney Keith Maddox, who's over the Executive Director of the LA Civil Rights Department. Reparations, wave, smile, stand up, bow. The Reparations Commission Chair, Ambassador Michael Lawson, is on the panel. Reparations Vice Chair, Kwanzaa Jones-Mohammed, is on this panel. Reparations Advisory Commission Secretary Mark Wilson is with us. Oh, Mark Wilson is not with us? Okay. But Reparations Advisory Commission, Monica Kaisi is here. Also on the commission for Joe Roberts, not here in spirit. And then research team is represented as well. Brian Posey, Marissa Tureski, you just heard from his team, Dr. Stephen Graves, Dr. Gabrielle Salasi, Dr. Karen Stanford, and Dr. Marquita Gavage. I know I didn't say that name right again. Gavage. I'm gonna get it. I'm not gonna say that it rhymes with damage. Okay, so let's take on some of these questions that you have. You know, it is a time when we are seeing things like affirmative action, overturn, CRT, and Black studies targeted in schools in this environment. How realistic is it, or how productive is it to try to move forward with reparations? Ambassador Lawson, you want to tackle that, or someone on the panel specifically that wants to tackle that?
This is the fight that we have had to fight from the beginning. And the fact that there is pushback is expected. So when you talk about having some pushback on this, this is what we have done, this is what our parents have done, our grandparents have done. They have fought the fight, and it is up to us to pick up the baton and keep running it. And with the team that we have here, there is no doubt in my mind that we will push this forward. Thank you.
You know, momentum does seem to be growing from California, from the task force. Now we see more states, and considering we won't see more cities taking this up. So I guess the question is, how can this work, specifically the work of LA, support California's state initiatives and also the momentum for a federal program? Dr. Salasi, you want to take that, or someone else on the panel?
I think our study, what it really does, it sort of bookends the study in the state of California. One of the things that I really sort of became aware of while helping to write this particular study is that while California, or Los Angeles in many ways, is a unique city in terms of its overall relationship to the rest of the nation, in terms of like having slavery as a major or minor part of its history, there are enough harms as you read through the study to indicate that Los Angeles truly is a southern city, right? Both in its psychology and its geography. So I think that when you, after you get done reading the executive summary here, and you actually do read the full-blown report, I think all of you will be thoroughly convinced that reparations is actually accounted for and necessary to make the Black community whole. So I think the California study was a fantastic study, and we in many ways modeled our study on that. I think our study will actually be one of the more unique reparations studies that has actually been done in the United States. And I dare say that I don't think that you will find another city in the United States that have the same kinds of racial dynamics and issues that the city of Los Angeles.
Someone on the research team that we haven't heard from yet, just to tease out something that really surprised you, the most surprising piece of research or information that came forward in your opinion. Who wants to take that on?
Hello, everyone. I would just like to say I was surprised that the city itself did not collect data on African Americans in specific areas. Often those areas that are considered controlled by the judicial structure, by the county, for instance, the LA city has no specific data researchers and for the public. So you don't know what's really going on unless you are willing to find a way to disconnect the data from the county's data and then find where Black people in the city, where good information relates to them. So that's one of our recommendations, is that the city consider collecting data on African American children, even if they attend LAUSD, they attend private schools. We need the city to collect data on health care, for instance, and just a whole host of areas. So that was the most surprising to me.
I mean, that tracks with some of the proposals at the state level too, right? Let's find out what's going on, let's get the data. Okay, and was there any, this is also for the research team, someone we haven't heard from, was there something you hope to prove, a hypothesis or, a theory that you had that you wanted to prove that still needs more research or that you were able to land?
There wasn't anything that, from a researcher standpoint, that I researched that I was completely surprised at, except for the fact that I think that some of the aggression that I witnessed in my research perpetrated on African Americans was quite stunning. As an example, can you imagine waking up in the morning, preparing yourself to go to work, so you walk outside of your home and you open up your car door, and an LA police car drives by. You put your things into your car, and the police car backs up, sees you, they get out of the car, and the next thing that you know, you are in a jail cell, and you are severely beaten. You are held as a prisoner for several days trying to make bail. They have a court hearing, and the judge dismisses the case. So you have lost your dignity, your pride, your time at work. You are essentially going to be scarred, probably for life. Those kinds of things that I saw when researching this, things that were chronicled by defense attorneys who were seeing this kind of racial injustice, who were so incensed by it, that they themselves collected personal data. And they eventually turned that data over to news agencies or just kept it on file, and it eventually seeped out, and we found that kind of data. But those are the kinds of things that really shocked me, how we have these statements like driving while Black, and here in Los Angeles, just the very fact that you were a Black person, the Los Angeles Police Department, the Los Angeles District Attorney could in fact beat you, incarcerate you, and then all of a sudden dismiss charges, and there was nothing that you could do about it. So from that particular standpoint, those are the kinds of things that kind of shocked me when I was doing the research. It's just the everyday sort of casual racism that was perpetrated against Black people in the city.
Commissioner Tracy, can you talk about the interaction with the public and how the commission worked with the community?
Sure, and thank you, Dominic. That gives me an opportunity to comment about an earlier question that you raised that I wanted to speak to. Just wanted to compliment Dr. Salassi's comments about this the moment that we're in, and what you spoke to about the appears to be momentum growing. I just want to, as someone who in my early 20s joined a reparations organization and advocated around it during that time, I just want to say how incredibly dynamic it's been to see this new generation of young folks who identify themselves as reparationists lifting up this issue and bringing new life into an issue that many of us felt had died and there was no chance that it would be raised again. So really want to lift up that younger generation. And I also want to point out something that, this phenomenon that we're a part of, I think is incredibly inspiring and creative for challenge state localities to take up reparations. I think that's been the game changer. So we've been talking about it at the national level, but the reality is the kind of harms that we're talking about, they're manifested at the local level, they're manifested at the state level. So when you're making the case, it really is at the local level that the case can best be made. And so to see cities across the country participate in this, I think it gives us a chance to really see this movement grow and actually have some traction at the national level. So I did want to say that. That dovetails into what you've asked me to speak to, which is this process of engaging the public around these questions. It's been informative, it's been moving, it's been inspiring. I was commenting to Mr. Lawson a little bit earlier how much more you feel the impact of these intergenerational harms and the necessity of some compensation being made just by going through this process. It's been incredibly moving, informative, all of those qualities to this process. And it's been because of the public engagement. And I'll be honest with the public. You all were a tough lift initially. Let me be honest. I've described our public, and I think I did this on your show, Dominique. I described the public as reasonably skeptical, right? Like, is this really going to happen? But you all have taken up the mantle. We've got to continue with the public engagement. Want folks to begin to take ownership of this issue. Your voices, your ownership will be needed to take this to fruition.
Yeah, I mean, on that note, yeah. On that note, I invite everybody every Friday at 7 a.m. Pacific time. I do something called Freedom Friday on my show, KBLA Talk 1580. And we bring reparationists from across the country. Both of these two individuals have been on, that one right there. We tried to track down Ambassador Lawson. He's a little bit evasive. But yeah, 7 a.m. But it's interesting because we bring people from different cities, counties, states, and also different kinds of organizations and philosophies. Because in my opinion, we have to talk about this to overcome that skepticism. I was surprised how much people don't even realize the amount of work that's been done. So I think that's part of the process, is talk about it. For any of the researchers on the team, has this work changed you or impacted the way you see your work in any way?
I wouldn't necessarily say that it's changed me as a person, because obviously as a Black woman, I've always been very passionate about these sorts of things. They're my lived experience. But I will say that this research gave me permission to involve the community in that process. In academia, we have a tendency to get really comfortable behind numbers, but there's so much that, while we learned a lot of things from our surveys, there's so much that we captured from the interviews, from the focus groups, from people who were able to tell us their lived experiences. For example, one of the things that was really emphasized during the interviews was everybody wants compensation, everybody wants money, but this idea that the Black community was really never taught financial literacy. We were never taught how to invest things. So there's a lot of fear that even if we get compensation, what if it turns counterintuitive? What's going to happen when people get that money and they don't necessarily know how to use it in a pro-social way? That in itself could turn into a harm for a community. And so that was something that was very powerful for me to hear as a Black person and as a researcher. So really want to move forward with getting the community involved in research, because those sorts of stories, those fears, those things are valuable.
It's funny, that's one of my favorite talking points. And I always cite the work of Councilmember Price and others around universal basic income, because what we found is that when poor people got money, they used it for things that better their lives. And to me, that supports cash but that's a perfect lead one of them. It's been too long ago, we need to let it go. I didn't hold any slaves. Why are we still talking about this? California was not a slave state. Black people will go waste the money on Gucci. But those are the main ones that I hear over and over again. What do you say to those folks? Anybody?
Well, I'll start. We didn't want the perfect to be the enemy of good, so we wanted to stop the clock and make a record. We wanted to be intentional. Dr. D'Artagnan Scorza, thank you so much for being here. We are very, very intentional to make sure that we make a record of the wrongs and the harms in the city of Los Angeles, and we could not wait another day. That's right, we need the community to step up for us, because you can't have those of here who work in City Hall to be standing on the steps of City Hall by ourselves, talking about these wrongs and the fact that the city needs to right these wrongs without community support. So this is impactful. I'm glad we stood up, because Los Angeles is a city of angels. And as a church girl, I was taught the city of angels. Angels are messengers, right? And we are sending a message throughout the United States of America that we are standing strong in this space for such a time as this.
Anyone else want to speak to countering the talking points?
I just want to make one point. A big part of this is we're having to dig deep into the histories of our parents, our grandparents, their grandparents. And what we're asking them to bring to the surface are things that were very, very hard. There is a book called The Grace of Silence by Michelle Norris. And she talks about the stories that she had to pull out of her parents and grandparents. Just a quick one, she said she grew up knowing that her father had a limp, and she didn't know why he had a limp. No one told her. But she, after her parents passed away, she did her own research and found out that he had the limp because he was shot in the knee by a police officer. And one of the reasons why I love this book so much is because it is a mirror of my family. My mother's family, there were 12 kids in her family. I grew up thinking there were 11. Because one day she was having this conversation, said, there were 9 boys and 2 girls in her family. And her brother was standing next to her. She said, no, there were 10 boys. And the conversation stopped. I got her by herself. And I said, what's the story about this 10th brother? And she started cleaning. That was the end of the conversation. This is the book that she wrote talks about how that generation could not talk about it. So when we talk about reparations, we have to get the stories, and we have to bring them to the surface. And if we don't bring them to the surface, they just don't arrive. It is not just about the money. It's about us bringing our entire family, our entire community gone through, what our parents have gone through, what our grandparents have gone through, and release the harm, release the pain. It's not just about the money. This is about us finding a way to bring our entire, excuse me, bring our entire community back to where it should be.
Yeah. Yeah, I think our ancestors are definitely smiling on this whole process. It tracks with what Dr. Cheryl Grills said about finding mental health through that healing that you're talking about.
Question about the previous cases for the Japanese and the case with the Germans. What other benefits were there aside from monetary benefits? Were there other benefits made available to those communities?
Okay, I got it. For other reparations cases, Germans and Japanese, what besides monetary compensation was included?
So yeah, off the top of my head, so for the case of Japanese internment, it's my understanding that it was it was a formal apology. Can y'all hear me? Okay. Okay. So within the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, it was a formal apology, and then it was $20,000 in redress payments as well as education. So there was a fund that was also allotted for education. I don't know off the top of my head how much that exact was. And then when it comes into the case of Holocaust survivor reparations, that no, okay. The most recent, you're asking about what that looked like. So in 2013, I think the U.S. Allocated. I'm gonna get this number wrong, so check out the report. But Biden had allocated some $12 million. I want to say 13. Thank you. 14. Okay, $14 million was allocated to Holocaust survivors, I believe, just in the United States. But then there was a lot more funding that was allocated beforehand through the German government, and that was in the Luxembourg agreement that was allocated to largely infrastructure for the state of Israel.
Okay, we're opening up for public comment in just a moment, so hold your questions if you would. So this is this is an interim report. When will the final report happen, and when will it come before the LA City Council? We're calling Diamond from behind the scenes to the front of the scenes.
So the final report is forthcoming. There are 10 parts to this comprehensive study. And so our executive summary is online right now at laisforeveryone.com. So we are going to be conducting some community working groups this September. So if you didn't get a flyer, our team has flyers in the back, so those will be in the council offices of Seeley's 8, 9, and 10. And so we're going to take those ideas that you all uplift there and factor them into our final report. So we just wanted to make time for the researchers to put your voices so much more deeply into our research. So we anticipate it should be ready in October. So yes, the next steps, thank you, Capri. So again, we have the three kind of large working groups that CSUN has let us know are the most critical areas of harm that the city may address. So that's repairing stolen labor and housing, just so generously hosted by Councilmember Price. And that's going to be September 10th at 6 p.m.
We also will have Repairing Environmental Injustice and Health Outcomes hosted at Council District 10. That's Councilmember Heather at their just allowed us to host it. It's going to not be at their district office. It will be at the Michelle and Barack Obama Sports Complex, also known as Rancho Cienega, if you're familiar with that. And that'll be on September 12th at 6 p.m. Then we have the last workshop will be at the CD8 office for racial terror and legal systems. So many of the things you heard today, we want to invite you to fill out our interest form. You can get more information in the back. We will be working in working group style, breaking you out so that we can have some really concrete takeaways to put in our report. We also have an open campaign right now launched where you can submit ideas if you do not want to come to the working groups. There are about 16 locations where you can submit your ideas in person. You can submit an idea tonight for what the city may consider. And we also have the online form for you to submit just your ideas. There's no limit to how many. We will count them and we will provide a summary or synthesis of what the community said.
Okay, so report in October, city council maybe end of the year.
Commission will provide, so based on all this research, our wonderful commissioners will need to author their own final report that will be transmitted through the city clerk file system. So that will be, we expect that to be out and transmitted in November. So please sign up with us for our newsletter so you can have all this information. We will send a follow-up email to everyone in the morning. So please make sure you sign up and we have your email so we can get you informed.
Okay, quick question, final question before we go to public comment. Try to keep them to 60 seconds. That's just one radio commercial, folks. Okay, so what was the moment, the turning point or game changer in this process that, really amplified the significance of the work?
Yeah, so for me, I'm the only reparationist on this commission. I'm the only reparationist on this commission. And you heard Dr. Stanford say that the city did not maintain data on Black people, which in and of itself is a harm. So when you're trying to say we need to repair harms, and you have a city that's not keeping any sort of records to document, how do you do it? And we had this fantastic team that made it possible. And the game changer for me was when Dr. Gamage in particular, she laid down the LAPD piece. The LAPD piece implicated the city of Los Angeles. It implicated the district attorney, which is the county. It implicated the FBI, which ran COINTELPRO through LAPD. That is 3 separate governing bodies that takes us all the way to our federal government. For me, as a reparationist, when I tell you I got chills, I got chills. And that was groundbreaking, changing. I wanted to scream it from the mountaintops because this means we can pierce the federal veil. And that is significant. And it's significant at a time when we have the Pacific Legal Foundation doing something called reparation roundups, where they are tracking legislation that's specific to reparations, that's specific to a lineage model. We are in a battle, so when it's go time, this is the team that's ready to go. And I'm really, really proud to be a part of it.
Okay, let's do public comment. Am I holding the mic for this, or is someone else doing that, or how are we doing this? I can do it. Are you doing it? Yeah. Please just, 60 seconds. No Democratic National Convention speeches, please. Because I will come down there and snatch that mic.
And as you have folks come forward, I just wanted to acknowledge the fact that we have LA County Representative John DeYang here, attorney by trade with Holly Mitchell, Supervisor Holly Mitchell's office. So with that, just raise your hand, Jonathan, in the back. I see you in the back. Thank you so much.
We have a sign-up sheet, so we're going to call for the people that signed up, and we're going to go to the folks that signed up. If you didn't sign up, you need to come over here and sign up. We want to make sure we have time to get to everyone, and that we do this in a fair and equitable manner. So we're supposed to be starting with Jay Ticker. Jay, are you here? Jay's over there. Over here, down front. Stage left, camera right. Yeah, next up, if you want to get in place, will be Josh Sides, and then Akili. You guys want to line up? I don't know, you can.
Hey everyone, my name is Jay. 13-year journalist